So, so this discussion is going to address some of these issues, and especially from a human development point of view, because Pedro, our speaker for today, heads this Human Development Report Office, which is, if I could that index has become such a big turning point for the development discourse all around the world. But later on, they have been involved in multidimensional poverty concept. Last report that was issued was on Anthropocene, linking human development with the climate change and biodiversity and all other disruptions. And now they are working on a new report for 2024, which will focus on these new disruptive technologies. And that's how this discussion. So I will give an introductory presentation, but because he's collecting thoughts and ideas for the new report, he would be posing questions to the panelists and all of you to gather some insights. And so with that very brief introduction, I want to welcome everyone to this discussion. My colleagues on the panel and all of you, and all those who are connected online. So with that, I want to turn to Pedro to help. And your presentation is loaded.
Our colleagues, please.
Yes.
All right, very good. So I'm saying this because I want to make clear that the conversation today is going to be used in our human development report, but it's also about trying to share with everyone the approach and the lens that we take. We take different topics in different human development reports, but there's a common thread that we try to carry on associated with this idea of human development and the principles that stay behind. But as we engage with different topics, we have to learn from experts like all of you and get insights to make sure that whatever ultimately makes it to the report is correct and accurate. So I will start by sharing some of the findings of our latest human development report that Nagesh mentioned, because we are also trying to see if the reports do not merely jump from one topic to another, but actually build on each other and help us to craft a narrative or a sequence of arguments or questions that we are exploring in a sequence of reports. And then I'll present a very simple framework about how we are planning on approaching the topic of the relationship between digital transformation and human development, and drill down a little bit on the implications that it may have, the digital transformation may have, particularly for employment and for labor outcomes. So that's sort of the plan, very much in the form of questions or hypotheses that we put forward, as opposed to a bigger presentation in which we share findings or outcomes of the research process. So Nagesh mentioned Human Development Index, so I can start with that.
Not working?
It's not on. Okay, sorry. So Human Development Index at the global level always declines for a certain number of countries. So what you see on this chart is the percentage of countries for which you can put Human Development Index that suffered a decline. And you see historically that at most you have about 20% of countries that suffer a decline in Human Development Index. There are always some countries that suffer a decline because there are in terms of trade shocks or conflict or disasters that affect some countries. But it's rare for a large share of countries to have a decline in Human Development Index. Even during the global financial crisis, for instance, we see that we had 20% of countries suffer a decline in Human Development Index. The early 1990s, there was a large number of countries that suffered a decline. This has to do with the collapse of the Soviet Union at the time and the growth and health shock that a number of countries suffered as a result. But if you look at what happened in 2020, 2021 is really unprecedented. In that over that 2-year period, we had over that 2 years, 90% of countries suffering the decline in Human Development Index. So this sets the context in which we are writing Human Development reports at the moment. It's a context in which we are confronting a reality that has no precedent, at least from a human development perspective. Part of it obviously has to do with the pandemic, which was a health shock, it was an economic shock, it was an education shock. And these are the 3 components that make Human Development Index. It's an index that brings together indicators of standards of living measured by the gross national income per capita, of achievements in health measured by life expectancy at birth, and indicators of education, the years of schooling. So this was a key finding of our latest Human Development report. We have this unprecedented shock to human development as measured by Human Development Index, but by other of our indicators as well. And one of the implications of this shock is that it's associated with a time in which people are unsettled about their lives. So you see a manifestation of this unsettledness in this slide that provides some information on indicators of mental health. So the prevalence of anxiety disorders, depression. This data refers to what happened even before the COVID-19 pandemic. So there was already something brewing in which people were feeling concerned about many aspects of their lives. So implications for mental health are perhaps an extreme manifestation of this unsettledness, and later in the presentation I will show some other indicators that show that this is present in other dimensions as well. So the question is why? And in our latest Human Development report, we said that part of the reason that can account for this unsettledness in people's lives, again, not only perceptions, because we had this big decline in Human Development Index, which is composed of objective indicators, so one of the reasons why could be that we are confronting a world in which we are living with what we call new layers of uncertainty. So we are not saying that the world today is more uncertain than in the past, because it would be very hard to establish that. But we are saying that there are things that are new. So one of the things that are new is the Anthropocene that Nagesh mentioned, and it was a focus of one of our preceding Human Development reports. So the Anthropocene is about the way in which the climate is changing, biodiversity loss is taking place, the fact that we are confronting more zoonotic diseases because of the pressure that we put on biodiversity. This century alone, we've had when new or emerging zoonotic diseases, so these are diseases that jump from animals to humans, every 3 years, when new or emergent disease every 3 years. So it's not like we haven't had pandemics in the past or zoonotic disease, it's part of human history, but the frequency in which this seems to be taking place is unprecedented. So the notion of the Anthropocene is that we're living in a new planetary reality, a planet that is changing very rapidly, and that is changing as a result of things that we are doing to it, of the choices that we are making. Sometimes this is framing only as a climate change problem, but we are within that report that there's a broader set of challenges associated with what we call dangerous planetary change that exacerbates inequalities in human development and portends risks into the future. And it's new, and it's in fact unprecedented. That so much so that this word, the Anthropocene, is used to describe a new geological epoch, something that has no precedence in the geological time series. So this is one of these layers of uncertainty. The other one, or another one, is the fact that we are confronting a context in which there is an intensification of political polarization in many countries. This is the topic of the report that we are about to finish, and we hopefully will launch in the next couple of months or so. So this is driving division in societies, it's driving the challenges to democratic norms and practices, and it's making collective action more difficult, both within many countries as well as across countries. And we know the conflicts that the world is currently living through. Even before the war in Ukraine, we're already having the largest number of conflicts since the end of World War II. Of course, we have the war in Ukraine, now we have the situation in Gaza that is seemingly actually expanding into a regional crisis. So there is just a challenge with the tensions that are taking place both within countries, across countries, that are making collective action more difficult. So that's the topic of the report this year. And it's not like we haven't had periods in history in which we had this political polarization, but it's now taking new configurations and taking new dimensions, in part because we're living in a much more globalized world than in other epochs in history. So I come now to the third layer of uncertainty, and that's the one that's going to be the focus of our next report, which is associated with the pursuit of a social and economic transformation. If we look at the subtitle of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, it's about transforming our world. 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, transforming our world. So there are many dimensions in this transformation. Part of it has to do with the energy transition, the way in which we use materials, but a big part of this new context is also driven by the digital transformation. And that is the focus of our next report and the discussion that we're going to have here today. So this is basically to give you a little bit of context of how this report fits in the work that we've been doing in our office around human development and human development. So what is our framing for the next human development report? And here I invite you to be critical. This is all open-ended. It's just the way in which we are currently framing our thinking, but it's subject to critique, review, and suggestions on how to improve it. So human development idea, human development reports are people-centered. So we're trying to have somehow a people-centered approach to understanding the impact of the digital transformation on people. And one way of doing that is to say that we're interested in understanding the impact of digital technologies along the life cycle. So I guess there are three questions that we would like to address in human development report. So the questions are how do these technologies, digital technologies, affect brain and body development during early childhood. So this life cycle starts with early childhood. Then during the teenage years, and also affect the economic, social, and political engagement of adults and older people. And I'm putting older people here separately from adults, even though older people are also adults, because we want to. Sorry? No.
There is adjacent construction.
There's construction going on next door.
Do we have one?
No.
Yes.
Yeah. But
Maybe we make sure that it's okay.
Yeah.
Funny lah.
Yeah, please.
So why older people? Because as we all know, we are undergoing also a demographic transition in many countries. Asia is one of the places in which this is happening. We will try to also have a specific focus on what's happening or the implications for older people. So this is broadly the framework. So let me share some information about the way in which we are trying to gather evidence to enable us to come to views on how to address this question. So starting with brain development in early childhood, there is some evidence that suggests that exposure to digital media is correlated with the structural changes in the brain that are reflected in neural images. So these studies, I think we need to be a bit careful because they are correlational. They are not necessarily establishing causation, but the evidence is very strong that there are differences in the way in which the brain evolves that are associated with exposure to digital media. And something similar appears to happen during teenage years, and particularly appears to have a profound effect. So this is specifically social media, which is a narrower aspect of digital exposure, on the way in which people process emotions. So there are parts of the brain that scientists are able to tie with the way in which we process emotions, but it seems like exposure to social media during teenage years affects particularly those parts of the brain. So one of the trends that appears to be emerging, this is for the United States, is that teenagers are reporting at a much higher percentage feelings of sadness, awkwardness, as you can see here, particularly for girls. So the blue line represents the increase of or represents the number of girls, females that report feeling sadness or awkwardness. You can see how it's over the last 10 years or so, it increased from 36% to 57%. So from basically 1/3 to almost 2/3. So it's a big jump. It increased also for boys and men, but not as much. We don't have data for all countries, but this is consistent with this idea that exposure to digital technologies may be affecting, may having an impact on emotions and on perceptions of hopefulness, and sadness. So now on the adult population, as I mentioned in the three questions, I think that there are three areas in which we would be interested in looking at the impact of digital technology. So on the social side, on the political side, and on the economic. And as Nagesh mentioned, this is really a double-edged sword, right? So we can envision positive effects on the social side, for instance, the reach and frequency of social contact. And there is evidence now from the literature that, for instance, the ability of people to be connected to WhatsApp makes for a greater sense of community, of belonging. Maybe in our own lives, we can feel that with the family members that we are far away. But may also lead to increases in stress, and I will show some evidence of this. On the political side, it gives, on the positive side, greater access to real-time information, but it can also, on the negative side, lead, for instance, to more rapid spread of misinformation. And on the economic side, I think, in a way, to simplify the question, an economist would say, are these digital technologies substitutes or complements of people? So I guess that's the fundamental question. Do they complement labor and augment opportunities for what people can do? And I include here again an emphasis, because we want to keep this focused on people living with disabilities. This digital technology augment what people living with disabilities can do in their lives, but also in their economic lives. Or do they replace labor? Or how do these two factors play out and balance out? So,
can I between because it is
please, anytime. Yes, please.
it's more interactive and
Yes,
not-
please,
not-
please.
When you say augments new opportunities, not augment opportunities. Augments new opportunities.
Yeah.
So the labor is declining, total demand of labor is declining because of the, this new technologies. There is a new opportunity, it is not in totally.
Very good. Well, I think we will have to see if it is having that effect or not. I'll show some evidence about the extent to which this
Technologies.
is happening.
When the
I
driverless,
think we will explore
when
it.
the driverless car comes, there will be 10 million people become unemployed in India. 10 million people become unemployed. When the
Because of technology.
driverless car.
Driverless cars.
Yeah. I'll show some evidence about that.
That's a very significant number.
It is. Well, this is the kind of information that we will need to
Inputs you require.
the evidence for our report. But point well taken. I understand your. So let me just. So this was what I was trying to. What I mentioned earlier, that stress is increasing. This is the percentage of people experience stress based on global representative data from dialogue. And you see that, I mean, it's a bit volatile, goes up and down, but it has been increasing essentially from the time, again, this is all, there's no causality here, but essentially from the time in which these devices were introduced around 2007, 2008. This is when this science started to develop. And it doesn't matter the level of education that people have, it's affecting everyone. So what role do digital technologies play in this increasing of stress? So what is stress? Stress is the ability, is the perception that we don't have the ability to deal with what life is throwing at us, right? We feel overwhelmed. So people are reporting any increases in this perception of stress. So on the negative effects on the political side, I mentioned polarization. So what this graph shows is the distribution of people across the political spectrum from left to right. And there are three sets of bars, and the difference between each set of bars is the perception of insecurity that each group has. So on the left, we have the group of people that report low perceptions of insecurity, and then on the right-hand side, people that express feeling very insecure about the world, about life. So you see that the red bars that represents the share of people in each of these three groups that are attracted to the extremes, both on the left and on the right, go up. So people that feel insecure, that feel threatened, tend to be attracted to the extremes of the political spectrum. This is data from the World Value Survey that is also representative. It's not global like the Gallup, but it represents a very large share of the global population, around 80% or 85%, if I'm not mistaken. So again, what is the role of digital technologies in driving this perception of insecurity? And
Why the mistrust? Sorry, I don't know. What is the mistrust?
Mistrust, we find a similar correlation between people feeling insecure and people trusting others less. So we also try.
Logic is not very clear.
With
Why people are trusting less? The logic, what is the logic?
Why are we?
why are the people trusting less? So here I think we need to go a little bit, and we do that in the report, in last year's report, into psychology. So it seems that when people feel insecure, when people feel threatened, humans feel threatened, they tend to become more inward looking. So they tend to become closer to the in-group. Because that's a mechanism of...
They will trust all each other.
But within the group, right? Within the group. No, it's a very good point. So they trust more people that are close to them. But the indicator of trust that I'm talking about here is what's called generalized trust. And in fact, that's a very good question that you're posing. What we report is that trust depends on the social circle.
But here is the technology. It is a
So
technology based. It is not a social, it is a digital technology impacting,
I don't know.
increasing distrust.
I don't know. That's the question. But let me just explain, because I think this is important. So what we have, and we have a chart in the report that shows this. We have on the horizontal axis a social circle. So we have family, community, country, religion, any person, generalized trust. And then we, on the vertical axis, we have how much do you trust each of these circles. So as you would expect, you see a declining line. So people trust a lot their family, people trust a little less, but still at a very high levels their community. People trust less than their community, but still fairly high levels their people in the country, and their generalized trust less. So there's a gradient.
No, but I think what I understood here
Yes.
is that over a period of time,
Sorry?
over a period of time, the trust is declining. It is more mistrust over a period of time, not below three categories. Always the trust over a person who is abroad and from a country with which we don't have good relations, we have less trust. Okay, so it is not the family and this and country and international. It is basically the mistrust is increasing over a period of time. Like family trust level was this, now the trust level has declined. So mistrust has increased. This is what I thought you are saying about the implication of the
Yes, but
technology.
I'm trying to address, you asked what's the connection between insecurity and trust, right? That was the question you posed. So,
The mistrust,
yes, the mistrust and
rising
insecurity.
mistrust.
Anyway, we can
So
come
I
back,
think we can-
come back
No,
to
but
it.
it's important because so there's a gradient, right? In trust between as you move towards a higher social circle, a larger social circle. So this gradient, what we find is that this gradient is steeper for people that feel insecure, right? So that's the connection between insecurity and decline in trust. And the mechanism, again, is that's what social psychologists and psychologists tell us, is because people tend to trust even more their in-group, but much less larger social groups. So this is what we found already. The question here is how do digital tech, this is what we want to explore. What's the role of digital technologies, if any, in shaping these perceptions of insecurity and playing a role in this
Because here the technology leading to insecurity is primarily because of our slow learning process of new technologies.
Could be.
And
I don't know.
Like people of older generation, they don't want to switch over to
Yeah.
digital transactions.
Very good point.
They think it may go for the cybercrime or something.
Yeah.
So they are a bit hesitant. They say cash, I would prefer to pay in cash rather than card.
Digital.
So that is a very
That's a-
good
that's a
with age and adoption of the new technology. So that is the way the new technology is emerging. So everybody is finding resistance with the new technology adoption because the insecurity, cyber security issues and all that. That is why this is leading to insecurity.
That's a very plausible hypothesis. So to test that, we have data that is disaggregated by age, so we can test that hypothesis and see if the older
By age, yeah.
by age, exactly. If by age there is a differentiation.
I
Yes.
have a quick question for you. This is about human security that has no media control.
Yes.
What you're getting here is,
Perceptions. This is people
This is-
saying.
but
This-
what's very interesting is that irrespective of the insecurity, there seems to be one segment, that is about 30% in the culture, who had high levels of mistrust.
No, this is not, the graph is not about trust, the graph is about.
Only the higher insecurity.
So,
And the political self.
yes, so
How would you read that? That's,
the graph.
yeah, exactly.
So the graph, each set of bars
Yes.
places people across the political spectrum. I don't think we can see very well.
Yeah, but.
From the extreme left to the extreme right.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
So the difference between each set has to do with the perception of insecurity. So people are sorted into three baskets. Those that feel very insecure are on the basket on the right.
But it seems to really go slow down.
Which one?
The.
the percentage of the red bars increases,
Okay.
right?
Okay, that's what
That's what I mean, is that as people feel more insecure, they are attracted to the extremes of the spectrum, both on the left and the right. And that's what drives. This is what polarization is.
Yeah.
Now you can tell me, well, the majority of the people are still in the middle, and it's true, and that's what you find, you know. But polarization, you know, the fact that people become attracted to the extremes can sometimes make it very hard for the political system to function. Because you don't need to win an election by being at an extreme to influence the outcome of decisions of the government if you are part of the government, and we've seen that in many countries. So that's what that's more the stuff that we are working on this year's report. But I just wanted to connect this to the technology, and there could be different mechanisms. So one could be what we described, hostility or lack of trust in the new technologies associated with age. There could be other mechanisms, other processes, could be related to
Risk factor.
Sorry?
Risk factor.
Risk factor could be to, you know, if people feel insecure, they may be more attracted to conspiracy theories or more vulnerable to misinformation. So there could be several channels. So we don't know. I'm merely posing the question at this point. So this is now coming to the point of the good side of technology, right? Double-edged sword, as you said, Nagesh. So it's clear that there are massive social dividends of the adoption of digital technology, particularly in low and middle income countries. You have here some estimates from a recent paper for both emerging economies and low-income developing countries of the aggregate social dividends of adoption of digital technologies. And you can see also that they are biased actually for education improvements, and they are biased towards women in a positive way. So this is sort of the positive side, the potential of digital technologies to generate social dividends. On artificial intelligence, this is a very interesting study. So this was a study that did a controlled experiment on the impact of the use of artificial intelligence for customer support agents. And what it shows is that, so on the graph on the top, it shows first the graph on the bottom, it shows the performance before the artificial intelligence was introduced and after. And you see that satisfaction with the support that people got from these agents increased after the introduction of artificial intelligence. But the graph on the top shows that the reason why it increased was not because the best performers did better with artificial intelligence, but actually, so the graph on the top sorts people by their performance. So the top performers, the top agents, artificial intelligence make a difference, but there's a gradient again, right? The least performance, or the worse the performance they were, the more the artificial intelligence helped them to become better performers. So I think this is important, this kind of findings, for this idea of, or this question about complement versus substitute. Right? So in this case, one way of reading is that artificial intelligence essentially makes no difference for top performers, but it can be very helpful in enabling the worst performers to provide a better service. So it's an example. It's an example of artificial intelligence augmenting performance.
Can it also mean that it will enable a firm to hire lower quality and potentially cheaper customer support agents, and the need for higher quality kind of disappears?
I think so. I think it's a good point. One implications of this is not by educational level, right? This is by performance. But one way of reading this is that it actually generates opportunities for people that are not necessarily the best, right?
Yes.
So firms will always
Yeah,
try
they're-
to hire the best, but this one way of reading this, I don't know if this is valid, but it's actually, so it goes back to this idea. It's an example of augmenting actually opportunities, technology augmenting, not new opportunities, but just opportunities of occupations that already exist because it enables people that normally wouldn't be hired because they wouldn't be good performance, but with the help of AI, they can actually improve their performance standards of the best performance.
Can
Okay. Yeah,
No, no, go ahead.
No, I see, I think this is exactly the kind of, shall I say, insight, which is very complicated in a very fast, multidimensional changing things. And we have to be very, very careful. Things change so fast with so many dimensions that we can easily pick up things we like.
Mhm.
Right? This graph can tell me 20 different things. One is that AI is simply so dumb that the smart guy simply doesn't care for it. Because soon it will be so good that the lower guy will not understand it, the smarter guy will understand. So it's a single thing completely
Absolutely.
inverts the whole thing. So
Absolutely.
my point here is not on this particular graph or insight, but the point is in the difficulty of picking up insights in this kind of a thing, and what kind of cautions. we
Yeah,
have.
no, I fully agree, and you know, all of that I'm going to show you is completely you know, testing the waters, right? We are not trying to make very big claims out of any of the things that I'll show you some other slides. But this is what we're trying to do is to read the literature and try to see what kind of indication. It's one study in one country. Can we extrapolate? Can we extrapolate to other occupations? Can we extrapolate to other contexts, to external validity? So there are all sorts of things. But at least in this context, for this occupation, in this place, this was done in the United States, it seems that the story of artificial intelligence augmenting what people can do, particularly and being progressive in some sense, is plausible. Let me put this.
So to also say that, you know, with the whole generated AI, especially GPT, there's this general notion that exists that exactly that those who are not necessarily qualified or not up to the mark in generated AI, you know, the writing skills also, or even doing programming. But to do that, first you need to have the knowledge. Because you know what, we all know that ChatGPT has all of the programming text. But if you don't really know programming very well,
Cannot.
exactly.
Exactly.
And I think that differentiation is super important for one.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Oh, sorry.
I would like to muddy the waters a little. You should not mind it.
That's what we're here for. This is the time to manage water.
There are two points that I'd like to make at this stage. The first is, the claim that, or the argument that there was this, shall we say, overlap between, you pointed to your mobile phone and said, look at the increase in anxiety or something. Stress. Now, the thing is to go back to, what Marshall McLuhan said. Is it the medium or the message? Is it merely because this device came along in 2007? Or is it the kind of content that is now becoming available, right? So then we, is it because that message that's coming through your phone could also come through your newspaper, on the television, so when we point to the digital device, are we talking about the device or the content? So that is the, and also of course there is a larger issue of saying, especially when you're talking about adolescents and so on. There could be so many other confounding factors in terms of why is it that they feel stressed, there's the hormonal changes, a whole bunch of things that could be affecting them, which has affected us for a very long time. So that's one. The second point is this relationship that you made between trust and security or And there was this thing about, family, community, nation, and so on. I was wondering if you're sort of overburdening that relationship. In the sense, when I'm saying that, what I'm saying is the basis for trust between you and your family, between you and your community, between you and your sort of nation, or whatever symbol of nation. Each of these could well be and are probably very different. Right? So the thing is to be able to sort of conflate everything together and put it together might be highly problematic. And here, for instance, and I'm reminded of the work of Robert Putnam, who said there's no community in the US because they're not bowling enough. Right? So, but he didn't talk about the family per se. He didn't talk about the nation per se. So the thing is, I think that, of course, the whole notion of what Robert Putnam meant by community also subsequently came under criticism. But nevertheless, what I'd like to say is you might see these rings of association, proximities, as you go outwards, what is it that binds you? The binding agent itself might change, which is why this relationship between trust and insecurity might be overburdened. And that's why I use the term overburden in sort of putting these two variables on this X and Y axis.
No, very good point. So, Robert Putnam, just to go back to that, he used this expression that are forces that bond and forces that bind us, right? So this difference between the bonds that we create within a community and the close community and the bonds that we create in the
To be sure, but I'm just wondering how that will play out here when we're making this relationship between trust and feelings of security and insecurity. I just brought him through in Putnam because the thing is, because there is this differences, but because you're scaling up tremendously from the level of the family, whose definition itself is changing because of a variety of other normatives of changes and shifts to notions of what it is that we deliver to a broader community. So that's what I'm saying, that the intermediate set of factors.
Let me just say, one thing is what the data says, right? Another thing is the interpretation.
Yeah.
So how do we construct this gradient that I mentioned? So the questions from the World Value Survey are a sequence of questions, and they ask. It's global, right? So they ask, do you trust members of your family? And these are, adjusted for language, for cultural sensitivity. Do you trust members of your country, members of your religion? And then the last question is, do you think a stranger that you meet anywhere should be trusted, or you cannot be careful enough, right? So this gradient is an empirical fact that comes from the way in which people answer this set of questions. The innovation that we did, and this is well established in the literature, that there is this gradient in trust associated with social science. The innovation that we presented was to divide the total population by perceptions of insecurity. And what we found was that people that report feeling insecure have a steeper gradient. So it's in that sense that we argue that perceptions of insecurity lead people to trust others less. Not necessarily others in their family, because then the percentage is almost the same. But as you move down the curve, then you see this wedge emerge, particularly when it comes to the last.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm not questioning the empirical basis at all. I'm just trying to sort of read into it and try to understand for myself how we might think of this. Because, like Paul was rightly saying, because it is subject to multiple interpretations, we are trying to make sense of the empirics. So that's why I said, let me muddy the waters.
Is it for two time periods you are considering? Can you say that 20 years before the gradient was different?
Yes, we do time series. We try to do over time. Yes.
So when you.
No, I was just saying there's maybe also a hypothesis to be drawn, I mean, now that we're talking about these trends vis-a-vis digital technologies, the fact that the architecture or the modalities around these devices, which are correctly, as you said, medium, as to how much information filtering, information verification is also driving that uncertainty and insecurity in the first place. Because you are now, you have access to a lot of information that may or may not be accurate, but has the power to play on your vulnerability or insecurities or just ignorance. You don't know. So if you read something that rings a bell or convinces you in that moment, say this must be true. The fact that you had access to that information with this device and the fact that it's a digital device just makes that information reach you faster and more like you faster. So yes, I could have read a newspaper 20 years ago, but today I don't even need to do that. I will get a notification that it plays on to something that I feared maybe at the back of my subconscious mind. So it's the scale, but I'm just trying to step back and see when we're talking about digital transformations, how much from maybe a macro policy perspective, it drives, the openness, the non, or the absence of, say, extreme regulation or control or censorship even. I mean, I'm pushing it, I know, but drives this perception of uncertainty.
No, absolutely, and just also goes back to the good point you're making, is it the medium or the message? So what is different, right? Well, people communicated, that's part of being human. That's how we develop language, that's undefined ways of communicating through media. In fact, there's now evidence that some of the things that are associated with the sometimes you see this in the literature, modern human beings or Homo sapiens are actually shared by hominins up to 2 million years ago. So humans evolved, modern anatomically humans, I think that's the expression, around 300,000 years ago. But there's evidence that other hominids already had some of this capacity. So this is something deep, the capacity to communicate, to do art, for instance, in caves. It's not something that is exclusive to humans. So what's new? So one of the things that seems to be new, or a few things that seem to be new, include, for instance, the scale. Because communication was always somewhat constrained geographically. So what this is one thing that appears to be new. The second one is the speed, instantaneous, scale, speed. Another one is structure of networks. So it appears that with these technologies, networks acquire some structures that are new in some sense.
I think that point is important, scale and speed. But earlier, most of our news was normative, institutional, mediated. Most of them was mediated through certain norm-related institutions, even if it was just a simple TV channel, but it was. And today that normative institutional system has fallen apart. And that creates new geographies of information, which are.
Another one, which is very interesting, and I found it actually counterintuitive, is that information does not lose fidelity. It's what you say is transmitted through the airwaves and through the codecs that are in, exactly as I say. And traditionally, this is now how things happen. Information was degraded, was eroded, was and it seems like we have acquired evolutionary ability to expect that. And now when information is transmitted with the speed, scale, and fidelity, that is transforming the way in which we see. So when I did this, it was a shortcut to say that it's about the digital context that appears to be presenting elements that are new and novel.
Okay, here I have a couple of questions. One, the thing is, even if you argue, and I'm just being a little provocative here, even if you argue that the information fidelity is lost, is really ultimately in the process of communication, where a lot of the fidelity is lost in how I receive your information. Because I'm processing that, this is a sort of a hermeneutic process, an interpretive process that is going on. And I say he's conveying this even without loss of fidelity, but then I interpret it in very specific ways. So that's one point. The other point is if you just invoke this thing about how we have not changed, for the last 2 million years of the modern strategy. Given that, you showed the, what you might call the shots of the brain, like cross sections. But is it reasonable to expect that within a period of 20, 30 years, let's model, or much less, actually, since modern social media came to be, that the brain structure will change so drastically for us to be certain truth about what it is?
I agree. That's why at the beginning, when I showed those slides, I said we have to be very careful in how we interpret this, right? Many of this stuff that I showed is correlational. It's association.
No causality.
No causality. So that's why we have to dig deep, and that's why we're having this conversation. So that when it comes time in which you put the report out, sometimes we can say it's that we don't know. Right? This is what the evidence suggests. Exactly. We can put hypotheses and say, this is a plausible hypothesis substantiated by stuff like this, and I'll show some other things. But ultimately, we have to be convinced that the evidence sustains whatever claims we are going to make. But can I? Yes.
I have a couple of questions now, and we have jumped into it. I think one of the things I do want to ask you is, you're using the word value service. So when you want to ask this question about how do digital technologies shape perception, is there an idea to introduce the question into any of the surveys? Number one. Number two, all that we are talking about, I think we're talking about those things, Stanford, I think the societies, I think this is a unique set that we're sitting and discussing, who have this, and we have our own pressures of things that we have. But the societies, why those who have the future. So how does something like that get into a report like this? And how do you actually try to bring out some of those nuances?
Well, on the first point, maybe what actually. No, it's a very good question. So one of the things that with these reports we try to do is sometimes when we don't have the answers, we're actually working with the World Value Surveys and with Gallup to propose questions. So sometimes we don't know, right? So I'll give you an example of something that we're doing with Gallup that was suggested by research and by since we are not absolutely sure, but we believe that something is important, and they've agreed actually to add a set of questions related to this, and I'll give you an example. So that is something that may emerge out of this process. We don't have it. We are not prepared to do that. I think your second question is something that we struggle when we do a global report, right? Because a global report is a report that has to speak to broad trends, and as you say, so many of these things are so varied, different settings, not only across countries, but even within countries have very different legislation. So we try to be sensitive to that and to present evidence that speaks to this heterogeneity and why it matters, and mostly as a warning, I guess, that, well, we can see these broad trends, but it has always to have this caveat that things may have different expressions. Okay, thank you. This is what this consultation is.
Yeah, but can we call the lowest and highest to lower and higher? Lower the scale, higher
The low, yes, thank you. Yes, thank you very good.
Yeah.
Okay, this is another study that used an AI intervention and to try to see the effect that it had on political discourse online. So a lot of the political discourse online becomes very aggressive, hostile, antagonistic. And the blue lines there represent, I cannot read, I forget what the metric is. Yeah, it's some I don't remember what was the intervention, but it's an example of a study that showed that the AI interventions can actually be used to improve the quality of political discourse and discussions online. Because I mentioned the negative side, right? That for all of the reasons we're discussing, that misinformation can spread more quickly, more widely, but AI can also have a positive effect, at least in this study and in this intervention. This is another very interesting study. So there is this idea that because we digitalize things, we're going to consume more physical things, right? So I don't know about you, but I still get my newspaper every day, and I buy my physical books. My children don't. They get everything from this stuff. So what the study shows was an effort by Google that started digitizing books, and they started chronologically. You can see they started from books that were published at the beginning of the 20th century, and it's a process that they're doing systematically, trying to digitalize all the books. And so what the study shows, and what the graph shows, are the sales. And then the demarcation point shows the books that haven't been digitized or digitalized yet. They are to the right. So to the left, the books that have been digitalized, actually, the physical books, the demand for them increased. So this is, I thought it was counterintuitive, but it again goes to show that sometimes there might be processes associated with the way in which these digital technologies play out in our societies, in our economies, that might go against what we expect and predict. So it's another example of complementarity as opposed to substitution, right? So that's sort of the theme that's emerging here, right? When does it complement? When does it substitute? So this is a very interesting study about patents associated with augmenting labor and patents associated with automation. This is work by David Potter at MIT. And I cannot read, but automation is on one axis, augmentation is on the other. The point is, again, you see complementarity. You see, the more patents that are filed about occupations, so occupations in which there are patents that are filed to automate are also the occupations, the points, the chart are occupations, are also the occupations in which patents that are filed for augmentation, so complementary.
May I make a
Yes.
process point? And I think it goes back to what I said. Again, small windows, very large phenomenon, very fast, complex phenomenon. You can make anything of it. To me, what I see is any AI which is learning, taking labor augmentation, is learning labor replacement. So you just got it here, same patent, which is using something for labor augmentation, is rapidly developing data, which at one stage will replace it.
Right.
So many things, including the physical books. Physical books is a cultural thing. More digitalized books, more people learned about them, talked about it, therefore physical. Your kids don't do that, right? So many of these phenomena are interesting. One of the biggest problems with digital technologies is they are so fascinating that the fascination kind of can vary insights, and much more. And what UNDP report is what should policy do?
Yes,
Is the real question.
yes.
Insights also, first of all, the insights itself are muddy. And what is actually we are looking at is, and I think again, governance is the biggest issue about digital. Digitalization, if you take it as an autonomous process, we can keep on studying till cows come home and I don't know what happens to them. And there will be many kinds of fascinations. The question to reach is the governance deficit of these technologies, which would directly lead to the human development element. Because one side is an autonomous growth of so-called technologies and the market-oriented. But what is that which puts in counter-cyclical processes to it, which goes to the birth of the human development report? The economic growth itself is not human development. And therefore, digitalization itself is not human development, and therefore what governance does. So the bigger questions may become important, it's just about.
I think you're right, I agree, but the approach we're taking is before you jump into the policies, you have to understand the problems. What are the problems? Where do the problems lie? Because if you do a diagnostic that is incorrect, you may jump into trying to do things that may backfire and become difficult, right? And we have many evidence. So
Now, my point is, having studied this phenomenon for 20 years or more, the fact that there's no policy space itself is a problem.
that's true.
Governance deficit
So we
is
have
the
to
biggest problem.
Yeah.
Fact, when we have a governance possibility, then at least by these insights, we may do something. Now, the biggest problem, the single biggest thing is,
There's no.
why is it that digital technologies, which should be a good thing, why choices become traps? Today, choices are becoming traps. All your things are showing it. Choices become traps because possibilities of collective decision making have completely eroded, and there's a history to it, there's the facts to it, and there are counter-cyclical things to be done about it. And therefore, while I agree that problem has to be understood to reach right policies, problem is being analyzed a lot. Today, WEF came up with a report which says that disinformation is the single biggest thing. They have a thick report. They understand everything. Point is, nobody can do anything but disinformation because social media is global.
That report. So that report is based on interviews and perceptions, right? And we also use interviews and perceptions, but this is different, right? This is, I think, again, I'm taking an economist lens here. The question about digital technologies, and we're looking now at the impact on the labor market, is it substitute or complement? And I have some hypotheses, but before I get there,
I'm sorry,
I just want to.
you should allow you to
It's good. But I think I just need to walk through the argument a bit. So again, this is an example of I mean, you would expect, or let me put it differently. If the hypothesis is that augmentation and automation are substitutes, this line here, you would expect it to be, like this, right?
No trend,
Downward sloping.
Downward slope.
downward.
That's what substitution means. That if an occupation is one where you have, it is not digital, right, that way. Automation, and there might be other ways in which you automate the occupations. It's not only digital. It's a generic thing based on many years of data about the filing of patents. So the fact that you have an upward sloping line suggests that there's complementarity, right? The more there's investment, science, technology, innovation in an occupation to replace people, the more you also have investments in that occupation to augment people. So again, this is an empirical finding. I'm not drawing any implications from this, right?
Yeah, I see the time period also actually as it's 1980
That's a big choice.
onwards.
Well, the time period is going to be very relevant for my next slide.
Okay, that's right.
So these are the two time periods contrasted. So on top, now you have I cannot really.
1940 to.
1940 to 1980.
Okay, so let me try to a little bit. So okay, Thank you. So one chart has the augmentation patterns. The other chart has the automation patterns. And on the vertical axis now, we have employment. Okay? So what does this chart show? That augmentation patterns increase employment, as you would expect. That's what they are there for, right? Automation patterns, you see the downward sloping line, substitution, which is what you would expect. And for this time period here, from 1910 to 1920, the lines have more or less the same slope, right? So you always have in the economy, in a dynamic economy, you have churning, you have, things change all the time. You have new occupations, you have new technologies. So in this time period here, the lines have more or less the same slope. So if you can now show the next panel, which is from 1980 to 2018, what do you see? That the downward sloping line is much steeper. So this goes back to the point that you were making earlier about automation replacing a lot of labor very quickly. So these points, again, I'm not trying to draw too many inferences, but something shifted, appears to have shifted compared to that pattern of some balance or some equilibrium that appeared to exist in an earlier period. So this line now for automation, it's not that we don't have augmentation, but we have a much steeper process of the replacement example. Thank you.
There is still another aspect to this. I don't know if I'm jumping the gun, which is the emergence. See, here you have a set of existing occupations. Do we then have a case to look at potentially emerging occupations and see what that might look like, given the fact that your new patents that you're replacing in one segment? Because there's also this other argument, right? What we do, we're going to gain.
Exactly.
So the emergent occupation.
Now, this paper, by the way, it's a paper by David Rotter, as I mentioned, and I really recommend it. He also does an analysis that accounts for that.
Mm-hmm.
So how can you compare occupations in 1910 with occupations today? So he does that. He accounts and controls for the fact that there's churning also in occupations. By the way, I don't know if you know this, but a very interesting finding, also from his work, is that occupations rarely disappear. Occupations rarely disappear. They get changed, they get transformed. How do we know this? So again, in his work, he looked at the labor force surveys in the United States and the kind of occupations, because people have to, so we have to give a menu of occupations. And if your occupation is not on your menu, you can write it in. And that's how they come, formalized and become part of the statistical process. So new occupations always come online. But the only occupation, at least in the United States, that disappeared since the 1950s or 60s, there was only one. It was elevator operator. So that
we did not let it decide.
So that was the only occupation that actually in the United States is also there. Remember in the secretary building, they still have it. So UN also has to catch up. I know, I'm here, so she's an expert in this, and I'll refer to her. So, but I'm just trying to give you some evidence that that makes us think, I guess, or how it is making us think about these issues.
One minor point here.
Yes.
Maybe there's not an immediate answer available to this, but even looking at the variable of patents, how much does that also capture the options available? And I'm coming from the context of an economy like India, where if we're talking about digital transformation, especially in, say, the secondary sector, specific, zooming in straight to the manufacturing sort of space, right? Because that's where, when we're talking a lot of the labor and the workforce that we're talking about this place. How much does the rollout of patents, newer, sort of dynamic, pushing the technology frontier kind of innovations and inventions, really translating to majority economic actors which are missing. For them, they're, in the industry 4.0 spectrum, they're at 2 or 2.1 or 2.2, and the kind of digital transformation that would make sense for them has maybe very little to do with the kind of content of these.
Of course.
Right, so we're looking at a digital transformation nonetheless, so from 2.2 to maybe a 2.8 or a 3 or 3.5. But maybe that delta is not getting captured with this.
No, of course, absolutely not. I mean, this cannot capture everything, right?
Yeah.
This captures a very specific, I mean, this is again trying to test an hypothesis as to how new technologies, what kind of effect do they have on employment, right? I guess this is the biggest question. So what it does first is to draw a distinction and find a way of classifying new technologies that are intended to replace people, and those that are intended to augment what people can do. Right?
My sense also is that the kind of technologies we're talking about, and the existing ones even if they were not meant for one of these two categories, they could still be used in a way that helps augmentation. So from a application focused perspective, a simple retrofit of a particular sensor to a very old CNC machine, for instance, would still help with a certain productivity enhancement with the existing labor force. Even if the initial intent of that sensor was
to replace.
to
Absolutely.
I want to just take up Shraddha's point, and I think it's also based on certain developments happening actually within our organization and also surveys that researchers have been doing about that. I think what's missing in this for me, and this is something to think about exploring, at least for a couple of countries in both global south and north, is that you might have patents, but what's the level of adoption? I think the level of adoption is something, even if you have the capacity, you don't adopt, and why you don't adopt. I think this varies within sectors, across sectors, across countries. So I was just wondering, this would be a very good opportunity to get that and then try to see, at least doing some level of service.
and then to see what actually got the
Adoption, because I don't think anybody talks about the adoption. We all use
Assume
these
that-
different indicators and then immediately link it to these labor outcomes. And I really am finding it very, very difficult now to come up with, because we don't know what's adoption. It's there, but it's not happening. The second thing is, and I just give it to you, and as Shraddha said, which is really true that you see, and this came out in some of the European surveys, that existing firms are not in industry 2.0. They're moving from industry 2.20 to 3, even in Europe. Which are the ones who are adopting 2.0? This I'm seeing in Malaysia, when I'm doing some work, where it's complete adoption, because it's new firm, because it's very easy to set it up and start compared to the existing firm, where there are a whole lot of issues, if you want to be here. Yeah, they're legacy. So I think it would be interesting to problematize.
I think Pedro, you might just want to
No,
keep
this
this
is,
down.
this is.
You're right.
In 30
Oh,
minutes.
sorry, because I'm just going to pick up on what you said, because, and this comes from some work I've done in the past on what you might call frugal innovation or social innovation. And we spoke to a bunch of multinationals, look at, because they're coming here because the Indian market was so lucrative. But then you also find that some of the largest companies in the world, whether or Indian or, despite all their technological arsenal, if I may call it that, right, which are patent backed, etc. More often than not, they're completely flummoxed as to how is it that you actually bring it to the, bring it and sort of adopt it, because a lot of these things that they develop for North America, Europe, or Japan isn't going to apply there at all. And then there is this, what they call it, industry 1.2, 4.2, whatever. It's just the adaptation of often pre-existing technology, right? Much, which is not what you might call at the frontier, because the white coats simply have no clue as to what is happening in terms of, tacit knowledge that you require on the ground before you're able to translate technology. And that technology is not really the sort of the blue sky stuff or anything that's at the bleeding edge. So that whole thing about this transformational effect, and it has, you can see benefits that come out of it, but it has very little to do with stuff that's happening. Like what these multinationals hope, or even these, whether it's Indian or foreign multinationals, hope that they could do, and that's why this whole story of the fatal of the sort of the bottom of the market being lucrative and all that all very quickly crumbled. Right, so I mean, I just sort of reinforced in this sort of discussion.
Also, just a minor point, also from a human development agenda now that we're talking about it. It also has a bearing then on what kind of skilling, upskilling, reskilling we're talking about as a potential response. Right? Because it's not just then a particular technology coding skills or technology skills, it's also maybe the analytical skill that determine which tech would be appropriate in the first. Because if you have no idea what you're optimizing, what your production process is meant to be, for which some device would help you. And if I have no knowledge of that digital device is useful. So then what you're skilling, I mean, what skilling programs you roll out, say, as policy response 10 months later.
I think that point is so important. And I mean, I go back to these notions that we have of giving policy recommendations and actually implementing policy. So to your point, so Singapore was very worried with the steep replacement curve, right? And was fearing that you may know the story, that if you know, forgive me, that people were getting de-skilled, not able to keep pace with the new technologies. So the government gave an allowance to give people actually money, resources to train themselves, and made it mandatory for companies, for the public sector, for anyone to give people time to do training. So they gave a strong incentive for reskilling, right? So that was the intention. People were free to choose so it was not top down, right? People said, well, I cannot keep pace with the technology, so I need to reskill. So because there was no top-down enforcement or indication of what courses should be chosen, there was a market, right, that emerged. And it was a way of revealing the preference of society in Singapore about where they had these needs for skills, right? They didn't intend to do this, but that was the effect of the policy, was a natural experiment. Do you know what were the two courses that were most in demand? I mean, I don't think you will be able to guess. Flower arrangements and Korean.
So Singapore was about to lose its workforce to Korea.
Now, the reason, I mean, when the authorities found this, they were shocked. They thought people would go to AI and to whatever digital. So when they saw this result, they tried to understand what was the reason. So the people that used this policy, that made use of it, were essentially first women and secondly retired women. So retired women were interested in flower arrangements. And Korean, why Korean? Because apparently Korean soap operas and music are very popular in Singapore. So they found the opportunity. So that's why I'm very sensitive to this notion of policy recommendation. They're always pushed. What should we do? Sometimes we don't know. And sometimes we think we do, and then we try, and then it backfires. Right? So that's why I'm having this discussion here, is to learn from all of you, and I'm just trying to present some very initial reading of the literature to get to a stage in which we can define broad areas of. Okay, let me maybe. I mean, this is what we're meant to do, right? I guess. Discussion. So it's great. So I think I don't have many more slides, I don't believe, but this is about. I don't know what you think about this kind of work.
I'm just coming out of AI and discussion that I've had.
Okay,
And,
so, yes,
and I think not only this slide, but even the other slides that you showed. I was just wondering, so there's always this question of AI development. That one is discussion. So there's the other side of the story, development of AI and how much of it labor is important, which never gets to the picture. So there's this whole assumption that we have, it might be happening in certain cases of AI deployment, which is really going on. And likely to have a substitution of clarity. But there's the other bigger picture that I need to look at, especially from the perspective, where you have a overall workers of crazy. So I think.
someone has to write the program.
I'm not just talking about programmers, that's AI, or experts who also do the final validation. I'm talking about the army of laborers.
The cat is a cat.
Basically data.
Cat is a cat.
cleaning,
Kind of people.
verification, identification, annotation, and so that's the army of labor person, especially with stuff. And I think that's part of the narrative for me, which the digital transformations of work are doing in a big way. Because
Is that significant?
it's significant.
Very interesting.
And rather, that's what Balaji will discuss today, or presented, and I'm going to say that guys don't jump into AI deployment. Yeah, there's that story, but there's also a story before that, which is the AI development. And for me, that's also an area where we need to really think about governance, largely because I said, you have today top 5 or 7 big tech companies are shaping the entire landscape and infrastructure for AI. So, it's like a buzzword, right? You say AI, you get a lot of money. But nobody even understands there's actually not so much of scrutiny that happens about what that is. So that's why the reason I'm also talking about, to what extent there is adoption. Or what is it, even when you talk about automation, what automation are you talking about? What does it lead to the world? Does it lead to change in terms of complete displays? I think these are, nuances in essence that we really need to
Absolutely. I fully agree. I mean, again, as I read the evidence, like occupations, I think that full replacement of people rarely happens. I think you have replacement of tasks, right, by machines. But that's why occupations don't die, don't disappear. Very rarely disappear. They get transformed, right? But that would be very interesting. But even if it is significant at scale, that point is something that we need to emphasize. We need a box from.
Omar, I mean,
Parminder knows about all this work.
no, it's not that. I mean, I'm just making observation between these two. See, I think between whether it is replacing, and I try to understand what AI kid and animal is. As a kid, you are growing up, you still need to even recognize what is a dog, what is a cat, what is a door, At one point, the kid recognizes doors, cats, and all.
But AI doesn't do that immediately.
No.
It's a lot of time.
It does take a time, but AI is a creative accumulating thing, right? Once it accumulates knowledge in this part of US, it goes to Philippines, etc. So the point is that AI who's learning these things, and after some stage wants to learn what a lawyer's tenancy argument text is. Somebody else can make him an AI understand, but not the guys who say cat is a cat, door is a door. So it goes back to what I was earlier saying. This is so complex. While all these points are important, and the only intervention I want you to make today is societies, individuals need to have governance and self-determination space. If there is one indices of human development in digital transformation is, it should be indices of self-determination. If a society and an individual has a high indices of self-determination, then as things change, and as experts point out what the implications of our graphs are, which would be very, something can be done about it, which is important because all these graphs disappear because I can learn as much as possible about disinformation, but a Bangladesh government can do nothing about it because no social media guy is going to listen to Bangladesh or a Ghanaian government, because they're just too small to be able to have self-determination. And therefore, technologies have to have these countervailing possibilities.
Right.
National digitalization strategies, national startups, individuals, and we are working with G20 information integrity thing, that all social medias should interact on a common client thing, like an Outlook, where I can choose that I want 20% Guardian and 15% this, and rest of my friends, and let my client chooses. So this self-determination finally, because everything you learn goes nowhere if you can't do anything about
I
it.
fully agree.
So I think the indices of self-determination should be a big indices.
I fully agree, and in fact, in human development lingo, we call it what we call self-determination agency,
Agency.
right? Agency, the ability to be in control. I think that is going to be an important part of our.
Because today technologies allows you to do 500 things.
Mhm.
And if you have a problem, then it comes and allows you to do 200 more. But it doesn't allow you to choose what not, what proportion, what to do.
And agency is different from choice,
It is.
right? It's about autonomy, it's about control. So this is very central to human development, this notion of agency.
So
Amartya
can you
Sen
tell me the
used to
indices
say-
of self-determination in technology architectures,
No,
in
but
digital governance?
you know,
That's
an
what-
outcome of this report actually would be precisely that. To point, I don't know if we'll be able to construct such an index, but at least we can lay out first make an argument for its importance. And then lay out a conceptual framework as to what it needs to include.
Yeah.
For instance, if we need surveys, or if we want to construct a survey that would enable us to understand the level of self-internet, what kind of questions would we be asking? So that could be an interesting outcome.
Yeah.
Can I, maybe, I don't know how many more slides I have.
You have, yeah, so maybe you can finish the round and then.
Okay, so this was basically because many of the things that I've showed up to now are from high-income countries. This is a recent exposure to AI in a number of countries, including in India. You see there, South Africa, Colombia, and others. And basically, so the reddish things represent high exposure to AI, and the bluish things represent low exposure to AI. And then they also distinguish between high or low complementarity. So they don't use substitution versus complementarity, but the nuance in diversity or complementarity. So if the story is correct, it looks like exposure to AI is high exposure to AI, at least is higher in high-income countries than in low-income countries or lower-income countries.
Is it based on perceptions or it's based on some
This is a
data?
classification they made of occupations. So they defined occupations that are. That's why I don't know what you think of this studies of exposure, but it's very arbitrary, right? Basically, they say, well, this occupation is exposed. This occupation, it's based on judgment, and then given the structure of the economy and the distribution of occupations.
Next slide.
I will show the occupations in
For
the
India.
next
You
slide.
basically put all the labels within the different occupations.
Yeah,
based on
so here the occupations are,
And the industry trends are noted, and then they are copied
Exactly.
on the.
so it's things like professionals,
Quite
managers,
contradictory.
clerical support workers, technicians, service and sales workers, craft, etc. So there's what this shows is that there is, so essentially as you move from left to the right, it's higher skill versus towards lower skill occupations. And higher skill occupations are more exposed to AI according to this study and methodology than lower skill occupations, which I guess you would expect.
I'm just having an idea about, you showed this, I'm just wondering, it would be quite sensible to look at certain sectors. And and certain countries look at the same thing across, will actually understand the adoption and work with the industry first. Actually, because I
The
think.
diffusion of technology.
Yeah, the diffusion of technology, because I think otherwise, I think we end up with just this exposure thing.
Yeah,
But we
exposure is,
don't-
I
We
agree.
don't know
We
what
don't
is
know.
happening.
I
And then to come to certain conclusions about digital transformations
agree.
is part of
I
it.
agree.
It's also done some analytical work in this direction, basically, to say by sector, the kind of, exposure in terms of, use of proxy of computerization or scope for digitalization in different sectors based on the highest risk segment of voters and the skills that they would have. So what is it that digital technologies can be a replacement for, or routine tasks, repetitive tasks, things like that? Vis-a-vis where workers are required to show analytical soft and technology management or operation skills.
Right.
So sectors like, say, textiles, food and beverage, where there is high labor participation, but most of the roles are then technically not too computerizable. But vis-a-vis,
It can be automated.
yes, so that's where then there's also a gender angle that comes into say, which kind of roles are more susceptible to, and there's like 2 to 3 percentage point difference between male and female susceptible roles, so to speak. And then within sectors, there is some preliminary evidence, at least of what kind of proxies then you can use, at least from a skills perspective. So at-risk roles are linked to what kind of skills workers are required to display. Is it just, routine repetitive tasks, or is it beyond that?
Right.
So maybe we've done it through our industry development reports as of.
So it would be great to
Yes.
have that. So it's a similar approach, right? Exposure kind of.
And by sector and linked to skills.
Right. I think, one of the reasons I like by David Daughter, it's not based on assumptions about exposure, it's actual data, right? So you can actually see the effects, the empirical effects and the changes over time. So I tend to like this kind of work better, but it's very demanding on data and high quality labor force surveys that are not very
Then you
abundant.
can say something.
Yes.
And the problem is the digital discontinuities are such that, what do you call, I don't want to use the word earthquake, because it's being feared slightly.
Which way?
The whole fact that digitalization constitutes certain huge discontinuities,
Right.
that these long-term ones are otherwise good, as you were saying, because they're actual facts-based, but their extrapolation.
Well, no, you're right. Look, this is what it shows in a sense, right? There's already a structural shift in the downward slope. Right?
And if you ask industry, within the last 4 or 5 years, yesterday I was reading somebody, and this is very instructive about exposures. Some huge scientists were saying, today there's a lot of enthusiasm in the universities about AI learning, right? He says, don't be that enthusiastic because AI learning is going to be replaced by AI. Most. And this guy was really some big AI scientist. The AI is going to replace the AI scientist job pretty rapidly.
Yeah.
He was not joking, so I can share that. He was saying, be little careful about what you talk to that students in the universities. So that's what I meant by the discontinuities, the difficulties to extrapolate, because I always use this like industrialization, the late 18th century was a huge discontinuity. A discontinuity means extrapolations are difficult. Future modeling is difficult.
But it also opens the space, and that goes back to agency. It also opens the space to imagine
It does
things
creativity.
differently, right?
Alternative paths.
Exactly. Because I don't think any of us can even imagine what the future will be. It's like people in the Industrial Revolution trying to imagine what's to come.
It's impossible.
Like interestingly, in this case, I just saw something yesterday or 3 days ago, an acronym where somebody was urging replace STEM with STEAM and bought the STEANM and said bring in the arts, because we need to understand that just as well, because the science technology, we don't know which direction they're specifically going. So education should not be limited to STEM. It's about getting in STEAM, getting the A into the STEM. That's very crucial to giving people notions of critical thinking and the agency that you're probably referring.
Yeah,
No, my-
education
my-
simply takes humanities.
My son decided to go to college to study music, so that's what I told myself. That's a music institute.
How recent was this case though?
Um, 4 years ago, I guess. That's when I was told this story when I'm into use by Steve. I mean, this is a couple of slides about inequalities. I think there are many inequalities that we need to worry about. What I think is interesting in this chart is that so this is private investment in AI, and you can see the darker the color, the higher the investment. What I think is interesting is that the Industrial Revolution led to this great divergence, right, between the North and the South. But here, it seems like the divergence or the fragmentation is more along a different line, right? You see China, India, with very high levels of private investment in AI, North America as well. So, of course, there are inequalities, but the axis in which these inequalities are taking place is not clear-cut, or it's not similar to the one that happened necessarily in other places. So,
I think there is a small story of the venture capitalists. The one that you see in Southeast Asia, India, and all of this, it's all the SoftBank and what you see doing.
And this is back-ending a lot of work,
Well,
which is happening at the highest value chain is still there, and the lower value chain.
So that way, that great divergence is still holds.
Yeah.
very good.
Yeah.
Well, that's why we need to get that data. And in China, I think it's probably slightly
China is
different,
different.
right?
China.
So, as a European, I worry about Europe is.
Yeah, it is true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Europe is a problem.
China is replacing you.
China is replaced.
We are doomed.
But it also circles back to the adoption point as well, right? Because metrics again, like investment in AI, focus on the product development stage.
Of course.
And not yet so much on the.
No. This is just one way of thinking about potential.
I don't know how much is it, the R&D centers of every big global corporation are in Bangalore. If this is included here, then that's just the space is here, not the base.
Yeah, but we have
Everything. Yeah.
So they're not the global companies.
Yeah, they are global R&D centers.
60.
Only difference is some top software guys earn salaries sitting in Bangalore, which are Silicon Valley, which is just small benefit. For the rest, it is simply that office space physically located
Again,
in Bangalore.
global capability center.
MNCs can set a and run on their own.
They work for
Instead
their
of-
headquarters, but based in India.
So they don't need to anymore outsource or anything, so contract, they can have,
Remote work, this,
and then we know all the learning is back.
the IPRs are.
As part of the change in policy.
This is another one that is more well recognized, which is access to more newer recent vintages of technology compared to self difference between mobile phones, first high-end versus low-end. So a few years ago, there was very little difference, but you see that this gap is widening. So this relates a little bit to what we explored in the 2019 Human Development Report on Inequalities, in which we described the narrowing of some inequalities in some aspects of human development that we call basic capabilities, but the widening of inequalities in what we call enhanced capabilities. So this is an illustration in which these things this kind of inequalities may very much. Thank you. So I think in the end, so this is where we want to end, right? In the end, the report was to ask these questions. So it's harnessing the potential of the digital transformation and now to design policies and institutions, because we may need new institutions.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
To basically redress the harmful impacts of digital technology on cognitive and behavioral development. We don't know exactly the impacts, but there are reasons to be at least careful or watchful about what those might be. Redress the inequalities in opportunities of the digital transformation, both across countries and within countries. And ultimately, this goes back more to the human development concerns, leverage digital to augment what humans can do as opposed to replace them. On the well-being side, on the employment side, and also on the agency side. Right? This is the critical. And I don't know if we were able to do this, but I also wanted to start asking a deeper question, which is what's the meaning of being human in a context in which we have machines that start doing things cognitively that are closer and closer to what humans do. Maybe it's the arts, maybe it's, but what is it? In fact, I was having a discussion the other day with a biologist, and he said he's not worried with general artificial intelligence coming out of the computer science community. Because what makes us distinctive as humans is that we are an organism. And an organism is an entity that acts on its own behalf, and the machine can never do that. He said if general artificial intelligence is ever to emerge, it's going to emerge out of a biology, because it has to harness biology, this ability of organisms to say, I don't know. So this is a set of more deeper questions that I don't know, maybe in the form of a box or a spotlight I would like to pose. And how, so we discussed how digital technologies are changing the way in which humans relate to one another, but how are we relating to machines as well? Is that also changing? So it's the medium versus the message, right? But is the medium now becoming something that is also, I mean, I think it's happening already to some extent, right? The way in which we even understand what we know. How many of us in a conversation say, well, I don't remember this technical group, right? So what we know is not confined only by what we have in our memory anymore. It's extended by what these devices, the information devices enable us. So what does that mean? Does it mean anything? So it's having a little bit more of a space to engage with this kind of questions that we would like to perhaps explore.
So this question is a very philosophical one, which is at a different level than others, but I think this is important as well. And I was just doing a discussion a few days back, is that how we should, now it's already started, that AI generated content should be watermarked, Basically, people are already worried because the generated essays look like my friends is talking, and therefore I want a way to say that this is not human. Yeah. So we were discussing that actually we should force tonal differences between the speech, that we should never be able to forget, however intelligent whatever is, that it is not human. Because industry wants you to increasingly make it believe that it is like human. Alexa should look like, in a very yawning voice, say, wake up in the morning, the human person next to you is talking to you. Increasingly want to make it look more human because of the commercial interest. Where is that counter-cyclical governance points? Because here, increasingly, we have the capacities, and suddenly we have infinite capacities. And I think, therefore, augmentation of capacity is a smaller problem today, in general, than controlling that capacities. And therefore, the question of governance is more important than economic output in certain sense. And therefore, can we start limiting, because it's started in generating content, how to know when I talk to a robot I don't want a human-like voice. I deliberately want to not like this. Any counter-cyclical issue creates dissonance and maybe certain friction in the process. But the whole idea, if we have to save ourselves, is sometimes that friction is good. So we always make it clear that whether it's a printout or it's voice, that we never, as much as we don't confuse, that solves a bit of both the problems.
Yes.
Right, human-machine interaction, and also I don't start confusing my personal AI as my closest friend, because that person, the AI knows me even better than my best friends. And then I soon say, I don't want to talk to my best friend because this guy is more persuasive. And I see that be reminded every moment that this is not a basically.
But actually, I think there is some sort of realization, because there's now IEEE, which is the global electrical engineers bodies, huge. So they've set up last year an IEEE tech ethics special interest group. So I sit on that body. And so their tagline is very interesting. It says, if it can be done, should it be done? Right? So there is this slowly emerging awareness, a debate at a very philosophical level. It's not going to translate into anything commercial in the near future. Definitely not. And the interesting thing is in the composition of that board, there are 9 of us, there are only 3 engineers. Right? There is in fact one person who's a musician. Right?
There's hope for my son.
So what I'm saying is that there is this, I think, a sense within that community too. And while at the same time, you're having developments in or early, very early stage, DNA-based computing. Precisely the organism, the in the whole. We never know whether we're
Talking about it as a good thing or a bad thing.
No, this is still all like, pie in the sky last thing. Yeah, so the thing is, but they're thinking because quantum mechanics, quantum computing was the first frontier beyond your traditional, semiconductor-based computing, quantum computing. Then now they're talking about, and in fact, one of my colleagues was talking about this. He said, this is now the newest frontier. So there's a growing relation or sort of ties between biology departments and computer science departments about.
So general intelligence may actually emerge, general AI.
Getting gone by then, and I don't want to see that.
Your question about the question.
Yes.
Which I think is super. Also think a bit more about limits to the kind of development and also because I don't think, and that's where the whole governance point also comes in. So, what is the extent to which you go on doing this develop? What are the harmful? There are some very good effects, but there are also harmful effects, right? So do we want to have that debate and that is?
Of course, I mean, that's central
This
to
is the beginning.
the whole framing.
No.
So I think that would be something very important. And just one more point I would say is I sort of liked what you put down on transformation. And here I was just wondering whether you want to take this a bit to another level and for this passion to understand coming from the developing countries, what does it mean for these economies? What kinds of transformation and here I get back to the structure and trying to understand because that's both linked to the development process and also as a human. So interlinking. I think that would be something for you interesting. Because then you're talking about not only the redressing conflicts and the which cognitive, but also the kind of jobs that that's very fundamental that these kinds of technologies.
Absolutely. Because just to take that point one step, we're talking about digital transformation and adoptions. Are we looking at it at a personal level? Or as me, as a particular role, a role that I play? Because the adoption of digital technologies for me as an employee of a particular entity depends also on that entity's positioning in the ecosystem, access, availability, affordability to take that organizational shift towards digitalization. which maybe an MNC would be great at, but a tier two supplier, they have no, like a supply chain actor, we have no context for whatsoever. So then me as a labor force member of that tier supply chain actor, I have no almost agency there. I mean, I'm not the start point of the decision.
Right.
But I can make a decision to buy a smartphone.
Right.
So, the realm of control and action also depends on whether we're looking at, I mean, I'm not even which specific entity within the ecosystem will really.
I think that's a good point. I think it goes back to the governance question. Who are the entities that are actually, let's assume that we know what to do, for instance, what are the entities, institutions that are going to do that? And it may be that we need to invent new institutions, which we all do all the time. In the industrial revolution, how many new institutions did we invent? Joint stock companies, central banks.
So
labor
you
unions,
got-
labor unions
got-
also.
That's much later, but yes.
I think
So,
we have to-
Satyaki,
I have actually a couple of
Yeah.
points. One is that in this discussion, you basically started with the question of uncertainty, which is which is a kind of a progress happening with polarization and also with rising institutions. Basically focused on the impact of technology and how it is related to these questions. Now, my first question is it only the development of technology that leads to this outcome, or in a particular context, how this technology is being used, that actually gives rise to certain outcomes. Why I'm saying this, that if you are linking it with inequality and uncertainty, one can say that digitization is a process which is some sort of unification, which happened in the 18th or 19th century, where human physical capacities were codified or internal machines, and now some intellectual capacities have been codified in computers and that time also there was a fear that human beings would be an appendage to machine. That debate arose that time as well. Now again it is coming, that whether more and more human intelligence is being codified, then human beings would be appendage to computers and but always there is an uncodified part in knowledge, because some part is codified and the other part is static, is always static. And so the creative role of human beings is always new. So it is not that because of this it will challenge. But the question is that when we are talking about how the benefits of technology would be diffused, I don't think it only depends upon the nature of the technology. Even whether a technology would become a general purpose technology or not, does not depend upon the technology itself. If you see the invention of electric dynamo, even it was invented, it took around 50 years to become a general purpose technology in Europe. So whether the question Uma was raising, that whether I will adopt the technology or not, it depends upon many political economic considerations and economic cost benefit analysis. So not necessarily that even if a technology has certain benefits, whether it could be used in which purpose, that is more important. I find that this is somehow missing in this discussion. Because you see that if you are talking about uncertainty, of course uncertainty has increased and that has been expressed in several graphs. But this uncertainty has also created a demand for financial products, which actually gives you future returns, some assurance. And so financialization is a process which is related to the development of this uncertainty, which is being created in this process. Now, one cannot say that technology is the answer to reduce uncertainty. There is a social context. Because of this network platform economy, we find that making profit through arbitrage, both in case of labor as well as in case of natural resources, have increased. And that is giving huge profits to multinational corporations. Even if we talk about that when this process of digitization is happening, people like Zuboff has argued that this would give rise to a certain kind of power, and that is visible. Why I'm saying this, that if it is basically a transforming of human experience into behavioral data, where a consumer is not actually consuming the data, but actually creating data free of cost for the big companies. And there is huge concentration of economic power now. If you compare it with the 20th century, it is even higher. Because at least you can find 14 automobile companies who are ruling the automobile world today. You can find at least 7, 8 oil companies. But in every segment of this digital economy, you will find only 1 or 2 companies who are basically deciding it. And it is not only current choices, but they are in a position to influence the behavioral aspects of human beings in the future. So they have a lot of control. Now the question is that if you are talking about inequality and also about the kind of uncertainty that is emerging, what I'm trying to say is that the answer would not lie only in the development of technology.
Of course.
So the other issues probably need to be linked with this analysis. Otherwise, it appears that you can get rid of this uncertainty by a different kind of technology, not by a different kind of technology use.
Absolutely.
Which is, and my last point is, if you consider even social transformation, when Kuznets argued that when you are moving from agriculture to industry, then inequality in the initial stage will increase. The reason what he said is that in this process of transformation, people would be moving from low mean income of agriculture to higher mean income in manufacturing. So between sectors, inequality would increase. But we also said that within sector inequality also would increase because the variance in income in manufacturing is higher than in agriculture. But you say that in case of inequality across the globe, I don't think that this is something specific to technology. Even the inequality report suggests that between country inequality has declined, but within country inequality has actually increased, which is not captured. And I would say that when Kuznets was arguing that this inequality would increase, but beyond the point, between sector inequality would tend to decline because more and more people would be absorbed from agriculture to industry. My question is that whether this is going to happen in case of digital economy or not. Because if that is not going to happen, then more and more people are not being absorbed, then both within and between sector inequality is going to rise. And there is no answer from technology. So what I finally say that Kuznets also mentioned that it is not because of the intrinsic nature of manufacturing this inequality would be declined. It is because of political voice and an institutional structure which actually give rise to a declining inequality in the industrial world. And that is precisely what we see in the post-war social democratic regime when you have a rise in real wages of workers during that period of time. So what I'm trying to say, the question is that this 4D structure has been destroyed. We have a platform kind of economy. It appears to be decentered, but actually there is huge concentration of economic power. And at the same time, you have a void of social contract. Actually, the social contract which existed during the industrial capitalism is no longer there. So insecurity is rising. And there, the question is, if you really want to address the question of human development, then this, how to evolve the institutional structure which can create this social contract once again, which from Parminder was also hinting up several times that this question of governance and regulation, this becomes more important to really address the question of human development in the context of.
Thank you. I was smiling because, my PhD dissertation was to test precisely the hypothesis. So I tried to, it was 20 years ago, but I tried to, so we had this inverted U curve when there was a transition from agriculture to industrial societies. And already at that time, there was this discussion about knowledge economy, information economy. So the hypothesis is whether the curve was increasing, and I found evidence that it was increasing. But I fully agree with you. I fully agree, and that was the direction in which discussion is going. I think that, and it's important that we're having this now that we're coming to the end. I think one of the differentiations that I wanted to try to make with the report is that technology is us. Technology is people. Technology is not something that is out there that determines our fate. It's up to us. It's up to us. So it's up to us if we have the agency, right? If we don't have excessive concentration of power, and also the point about the erosion of institutions that during the industrial times were able to keep this in check. For instance, we know very well that the labor share of income has been stable for many years, right? I mean, this was, well, Marx believed that it would never be, right? Because he saw the power of capital and said, cannot be. This is going to either we have communism or it's going to be a revolution. He was wrong. Why? Because institutions came online, trade unions, political parties that expressed aspirations of populations for social service, whatever. So institutions were created that kept that in check. That is no longer the case. The labor share of income is not declining because there is an erosion of these institutions. So it goes back to this point that we may need to create new institutions, right, to deal with this challenge.
I think in a single line, I just support what you said. And if the report can focus less on, I'm sorry to use the word fascination with technology, because this technology's problem is so fascinating, it blinds you actually. It's just so beautiful things, negative and positive comes, they blind you to what is needed to be done. And what is needed to be done is that historical thing, as he said, post-war social democratic welfare states saved us. But before that, a lot of bloodshed took place on the streets, right? We don't want to go through it. We are today a more mature, deliberate world. And we can reduce the time of the blood.
The great transformation.
The blooding of up to the wars. And then the welfare state was, institutional systems of a welfare state were invented. So today, the UNDP kind, and I was talking about this counter-cyclic policies in a deliberate thing. Cyclical is what business and autonomous digitalization is happening. Everybody comes and tells, use two words, innovation and startups. Things will automatically happen. The world has become flat. Everybody's opportunities have been equalized. Let's let UNDP take a stand that this is not what it is. Huge amount of possibilities have arisen, but unless we take control of governance, and there are problems here because this time, first time, the technology systems are global. They were born global and they are not national. And therefore, I was saying Bangladesh or the Philippines and Ghana, because they're small nations who can't do anything. So and the institutions, they have collapsed for a good reason, because institutions are built on certain information and communication architectures. When the information and communication architecture collapses, then the institution collapses, right? And the institution collapsed and they couldn't do what the technologies are doing. And suddenly somebody comes and says, you have heard this word called autonomous, decentralized autonomous organizations. I mean, they actually use the word deinstitutionalize the word. I think if it even means anything. It doesn't mean
the cryptocurrencies.
but there's nothing but deinstitutionalization. So there are new kinds of institution, their powers. So we should be, so if, I'm sorry.
I think that's the line. That's
the line that the UNDP can
I think
take,
so.
that some kind
That's
of
the hypothesis.
digital governance indices. Yeah. And that's where digital industrialization also comes. Different countries, how much kind of control they have over, for example, if they want to make social media policies different, do they have control today? If they want to change the nature of certain kind of technologies, how they operate, right? AI model changes. How much policy control they have? These are kind of questions which can develop as indices, and you will find that both at individual level and at a country level, the indices are very low. And that can give us a normative desire to increase those indices. And that's what even Satyaki is in a different way saying, increasing that is need, not whether one shiny technology is better than other shiny technologies. That's not the problem.
Future of work assessment, all of this is happening. But I guess there's also some negative looking back at maybe in the 80s when the first advent of technology came and hit the world. It was met with similar fascination, skepticism, but also fear, right? So we didn't know what computers were going to do for us, how email was going to change post, things like that. But it
It
also.
also didn't change.
Yeah.
That's another example. It didn't
That's
change
the point I was going to get at, but because the initial
It led to more
reception.
global integration.
Yes, but the initial reception of expected impact on employment or roles was, I mean, the chips landed a little differently than was earlier envisaged. So we might be in that similar cycle, and I don't know if any codified comparison has taken place.
I think one comparison I do want to draw between the ICT one and what we are experiencing now. With the whole global integration, what you really see is many of the lower end world and you find the same thing happening with AI.
Right.
And the platform as this new round. That you have a lot of AI development happening in this which has its own limitations. And I think there for me, the whole issue of social contract is completely lost. Because I think one of the fundamental things which would be very nice to look at from the human development perspective as a labor, what's happening to labor? There is a labor, the labor classification. There's a
The
big
CEOs
labor
of some of these
classification.
companies come from women.
But CEOs, that's a perception problem.
Confuse ourselves with, I'll also tell you,
Hello,
that
Steve.
I've been looking at this whole digital stuff over the past 7 years. I'm quite bit into India. So you have Bangalore, where you have a number of the platform companies, AI companies, on the end, the headquarters is not here in Bangalore, but in San Francisco.
Yeah.
Why? The reasons to actually cater to a very large the American market. There are lots, if you look at platforms per se, which I did for the 2024, I couldn't believe my eye that though the companies are all based in US, a very high majority of them, the CEOs are Indians.
Yeah.
So, it's not that, but I think the issue is much more what these kinds of technologies do. They're all the Indians, all the US people, there's a lot of Israelis, there's a lot of people from the Southeast Asian countries from all there. Actually, if you look at it, you're at a very small margin. If you really look at who the ownership is.
Yeah.
But I think what is worrying is given that there is a vacuum in the governance space, everybody's right. Everybody's going about it. And that's the problem. And these few companies then shape infrastructure in these economies. Like,
Who would be the actors? So let's assume.
he is the global, and I don't think the one way of going about it is global international.
Yes.
It's very,
But who would be the actors?
India had in 2011 actually made a proposal to the UN General Assembly of the report was partly responsible to have a global digital agency. There is standing
For air control.
like for air control is a digital one. The World Summit on the Information Society has a standing mandate for exploring certain agency of that kind. And there was a working group of UN for 4 years, which was given a task to develop an institutional architecture, and I was a part of. Nick Brilliant was the heading that for one part, and I was in both the 2 years plus 2 years, 4 years, I was part of that committee. So this desire, because in this case, the governance architecture has to come somewhere on the top. And I don't want to start on multi-stakeholderism, which has occupied this multi-stakeholderism, which has occupied the space of what used to be participatory governance by UNDP, and we have allowed it to be taken, which simply means that big tech has a veto over everything, which means nothing can be done. But let me not start on that. So this global governance architecture, I think, is a big issue, and everybody is agreeing here. Technology will do it. It will give you two options: both to use your phone for 18 hours. And not to use your phone more than for 15 minutes. Both options will be given to you. Technology will be available. But there is certain autonomous processes will take you towards 18 hours because the commercial interests behind that want you to do it for 18 hours. So who would do the other thing is only governance.
Right.
And therefore, for our problem is neither good technology or bad technology. Our problem is digital governance
Right.
and digital self-determination. This is the main problem.
Whatever the global challenge we confront, be it climate, be it governance of digital, countries have to voluntarily sign up to it, right? So what would be the incentives? What would there be?
I think there is, and
I'm trying to push because I would like to.
no, I tell you,
Yeah.
Pedro, one big thing has happened last year, and my presentation included how the governance mechanism started. In 1997, Bill Clinton's administration came out with the first policy document on anything digital, which called Framework for Global E-Commerce. It had a very interesting line. He says, in this area, governments will not do things. It will be private sector led, and governments will step back. It actually was stated. I have never seen a difference why big pharma actor is different from big tech, but somehow there is, and I don't understand it even in 20 years here. Both are interested in making the maximum money. But that framework said that in this sector, governments will step back. Now, since internet was invented in the US, the policy frameworks are cut pasted in all countries. In next 1 year before, the US Telecommunication Act came and said, telecom will be regulated, internet not will be regulated. And this was the height of neoliberal area, Bill Clinton, Al Gore, and everybody cut pasted it. And I do keep on saying that by accident, if internet was born in Sweden, things would have been different. Things would be different. But then it kept on happening. And then this thing, what multi-stakeholderism was discovered. Why? I would go to meet a secretary and say, I want to talk about some digital issues. And he'll say, wait a minute, let me computer guy come. I said, no, I want to talk to you. But this mental thing that if I need a policy discussion,
Yeah.
the technology guy should come. So he came in as an advisor, but he became the victor. These are things which happen. We have screwed up the digital governance system finally. I mean, we have made happened is at the WTO, US came in 2016 and came up with a digital trade template, which was started at the what was that? TP,
That?
no.
No.
The TPP, the Trans-Pacific ones was created. So the whole agreement basically was nothing other than to say that in future countries will not be able to regulate.
Yeah.
So any lever of possible regulation, which is data, which is source code examination, which is forcing local computing facilities, so systematically chose all levers, and you have to sign off your power of those levers.
Right.
And therefore you can't do it. And people didn't understand what it was. Now, what interesting thing has happened in December is US withdrew from all those positions from the WTO, its own positions.
Right.
It was like a seismic act. And I compared that act as the opposite of what started with Al Gore, who said governments will not interfere. And today US said, which is a home to big tech, he said, we want these policy levers back in our domestic policy. And I think that's in that space where.
So what has
It's like
changed?
industrial.
Yeah, policy, right?
The Inflation Reduction Act.
We were talking about that before coming here. So, well, it's
Thank you very much.
17.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
And,
We could go on for
Could go
another
on.
2 hours.
No, it will go on.
It will go.
Because I'll come back and
Yes.
we'll have another discussion.
Yes, no, full day. We will have.
We needed to,
Full day.
because we needed to have presentations.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I hope you can continue to collaborate.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, we are actually working very closely with the, and,
So with
will be
Umar
on.
and Parminder,
Yeah.
with all of us,
Yeah,
we should
yeah,
stay in
yeah,
touch.
yeah.
And also please share information, papers.
I'll make a short note, so some things that I just.
There were actually some people typing in the chat box, but maybe we will copy and send it to you.
Please.
You can, now, I think we are already 32 minutes, you know, over,
Check out the
over
Bible, you know.
the
They
time.
gave me until the 6:30.
But I must say that, yeah, so Pedro, thank you very much for energizing everyone, especially our 5 panelists, so much that we lost track of time. for once. And as you said, I think you need to come back and continue this discussion. Maybe hold full day or 2 days and we'll gather all the 5 back in the room. So, so to continue.
And I'll be quiet and I'll listen.
Yeah, you
Next
you
time.
better.
Suggestion which was giving us.
Yes, you need to speak. So provoke them more, they will give you all of their wisdom. So I think the purpose which you started with, getting insights, probably was so, but it is a discussion which is just started. So I think we need to continue this and over and over again. And there were people who were online. Hopefully they can next time be in the room. And there are some chat box comments which we will pass on to you. And we can follow that as well. So with that, let me thank everyone for being here and to Pedro, of course, for provoking such a very animated and intense discussion. And all 5 of our panelists and everyone who participated, physical and online. And I think this is just the beginning of a very intense discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you.